Welcome to the Fall 2020 Speech Showcase. My name's Cameron, and I'm a member of Speech and Debate. Speech and Debate is a team, a class, and a club where students can perform a variety of events within three main categories. The first is platform speaking, where students write, memorize, and perform speeches similar to that of a TED Talk, or something you may have seen in a public speaking class. The second is interpretation, where students take pieces of literature, memorize them, and then perform them. The third and final category is limited preparation, where students are given a topic and a short amount of time to prepare and present the speech. Today, you'll get a chance to see all three types of speech. You're in for a treat. Up first is Jinno Vicencio performing his poetry program.
Ready? In and out. Oh, great. Now it's your turn. Yes, you behind the camera judging this async tournament. Take a nice deep breath in. And out. To be honest, I'm not really sure why I'm here right now. I mean, I get it. You work in HR. You have to jump through a lot of these hoops when people raise a big stink about nothing. But come on. I mean, this is just ridiculous. I mean, I don't understand why rehashing the whole situation is gonna be helpful. But if you really want me to explain, it will all be okay. Forget it. Let it go. Forget he is a good man. A growing body of research shows trauma lays dormant within the body for years. Eckhart Tolle frames this as if we live in two bodies. One is our normal self, and the other, our traumatized self, or pain body. Now, this is where your trauma lives, and it requires conflict and misery to survive. So, how can we make our pain body harmonious with our normal self? Through mindful breathing. In his 2015 book, How the Body Keeps the Score, psychologist Bessel van der Kolk offers, when survivors find a voice in where they are central in their own story, that allows them to know that their trauma is in the past and that it cannot control us. Giving the pain body a voice, then calming the mind and showing we're still okay. Consider this program a recentering experience. Here, we witness the calming of the pain body through poetry. The Thing About Bears by Troy Kinneal, Lunch by Sienna Burnett, The Good Man by Priel Takar, and the meditation poem by Thich Nhat Hanh. Becoming comfortable in our pain body, a process that requires poetry. Sitting in the break room, it was a normal day when Jim walked in. And the first thing I noticed was how good his lunch smelled. So, I took a bite. So there was this bear. He used to dig through my trash for rotten strawberries and chocolate, and I'm all for conservation. Look, composting. Not trying to screw things up for a feral creature, just trying to make his way in the world. The creature is not so different from myself, but I am also a responsible homeowner, and the only person allowed to spread shit all over my front yard is me, goddammit. And then I took another bite. And another, and another, and sure, he was acting kind of weird, but it seemed like he was fine with me eating it, so I just kept going. Have you ever enjoyed a meal so much that you can't wait to finish, but you also never want it to end because it feels so good to devour something so tender? Okay. So I confronted him, the bear. Brandishing a rake like some suburban Achilles. He growled and charged, and the hero in me evaporated. He ate me. Hush. There. Stop crying. Can't hurt more than when you fell off your bicycle the other day. Stop making a fuss. You'll wake the neighbors. Now. Go. Socialize. Remember, never tell, remember. Forget. The thing about bears is that they wanna hug all your insides out. They only want your insides inside of theirs. There's nothing Teddy or care about a massive earth-seen body built of rage and hungry muscles. It's his fault for not speaking up. And now I'm being blamed for something he let me do. And now I'm being reported to the company. I'm being reported to the company for property theft. I mean, it sounds like a cry of attention if you ask me. I'm not a thief. Drooping your head in shame. It is a shame. It is shameful what happened, but not if you don't say. Don't tell. It only exists in your mind. You will remain pristine. Come on now. It happened a day, a week, a year, 10, 20 years ago. Now why do you wanna let the cat out of the bag if I really stole something from him? it would have been a lot more violent. In, out, deep, slow, calm, ease, smile, release. In, out, deep, slow, calm, ease, smile, release.
Next up is Noella Pacheco performing her Prose.
She sobbed a little harder as she imagined something her mother repeating to her. "Are you really that desperate for attention?" How cruel, how unfair life was. Elsie had done nothing to deserve this, nothing. And the very conviction of her innocence just pierced her. And what if, instead of screaming, she was to force herself to lie here until morning? I mean, her mother usually woke up early. It wasn't impossible that she would discover Elsie before anybody else had the chance to see her. Though, sleep would be out of the question. After all, morning was not that far off, but was she really that brave? It would be the hardest thing that she'd ever have to do in her entire life. Could she really suffer so much pain in silence? According to the 2018 book, The Genius of Natural Childhood, when children use their imagination in play, they develop crucial psychological capacities which help them understand the world and reality. Childhood development scholars have repeatedly told parents to listen to their children, especially their imaginative impulses. Harder said than done, of course. Sometimes listening to your child's imagination runs directly against the parent's primary objective, to keep the child alive. The problem? If you don't listen to your child's imagination, they'll stop imagining. Imagination by Sigrid Nunez. Poor impulse control, they called it. Poor judgment. Saying whatever she felt like without thinking how it would sound. And to her math teacher who, observing Elsie's uncovered yawn, wanted to know if Elsie was bored with geometry. No way! I love geometry. I just don't like this class. And there had been other complaints from the school. Inappropriate laughter. And it wasn't just that Elsie laughed louder and longer than everybody else at things that were funny, though that was troubling enough. It was that Elsie laughed when no one else was laughing, and there appeared to be nothing funny at all. The flip side of this were equally inexplicable bouts of tears which Elsie could not, nor would not, explain. An inventive imagination was a gift from the gods, or a curse, if you couldn't control it. Elsie would sometimes start talking, telling a story, say getting so carried away, piling it on so thick, flying off so many tangents that she might as well have been speaking in tongues. And if you pointed this out to her, her response would be to clam up. But the worst thing so far had been the scream. At school one day, Elsie had accidentally left her French workbook in her locker and had been given permission to leave class to go get it. The lockers were on the ground floor, 2 flights down. It was allergy season, and once she reached the ground floor, she let out a head-scouring sneeze, and the stairwell responded with the most awesome, eerie echo. So, what would it sound like if she screamed? like a girl who'd seen Ghostface, apparently. Those who came running were not amused. The assistant principal was the least bit understanding, and even Elsie's friends accused her of being uncool. She got tired of saying, "It just happened," and being told that this would not do. I wanted to see what it sounded like, and I couldn't help it. Would not do either. But she was telling the truth. I mean, why couldn't everybody just accept it? Sure, it had seemed like a bad idea to her after the fact, and sure, she was sorry, especially now that some kids were treating her like a freak. And she had apologized several times. What more did they want? Do tell her. When her mother found out, she said, "In a situation like that, before you act, you have to take a deep breath." Well, actually, she had taken a deep breath before screaming. In a situation like this, you have to ask yourself, what will happen if I do this thing? And if the answer is something bad, then you have to show some control. You have to tell yourself not to do it, and then just don't. Elsie had tried to explain to her parents that at the time, it had felt like almost if somebody was daring her, or as if she was daring herself, but hadn't she always had that touch of the particular devil in her? It was odd. Even with the window open, Elsie's room was still stifling. She could not sleep, though everybody else in the house was. 2 a.m., she got up, left the room, downstairs, and out the front door. It was thrillingly dark, but there she stood in the middle of the black lawn. The night had turned everything strange. The yard was alien country, and she herself was a different girl than the miserable one an hour ago. Though it had given her a giddy sense of pride to be prowling around outside while everybody else slept. But she was not alone. Some animal, she thought. It had been on her left and just now crossed her path. It was on her right. She couldn't see it nor hear it, but she knew it was there. She began walking faster. But in the dark, she had not realized how close she was to the apple tree. She had stepped on an apple, twisting her ankle and falling full weight on the joint. There she lay, on her side in the wet grass, stunned, panting. What choice did she have but then to crawl? She gritted her teeth and moved onto all fours. But after going only a little ways, she stopped. The ankle was surely broken, and the struggle, brief though it was, left her covered in sweat and near vomiting. Still, it was not the physical suffering that made her start to sob. It was knowing that she was gonna have to scream for help. She would scream, waking the entire house, all the lights would blaze on, everyone would come running, and then how on earth would Elsie go on living? Do tell her. She sobbed a little harder as she imagined something her mother repeating to her. Are you really that desperate for attention? How cruel, how unfair life was. Elsie had done nothing to deserve this, nothing, and the very conviction of her innocence just pierced her. Could she really suffer so much pain in silence? She had forgotten all about the animal. She pushed herself upright, staring wildly into the dark. She had thought about the mountain lions and coyotes and bears, sightings that were not always believed, but Elsie believed them all. At least she did now. And she was afraid. There she lay, helpless, injured. Pray. Then a twig had snapped off as a man's foot had trod on it, at which she felt a scream of hurricane force start to gather inside of her. But unseen, the fox stood, forepaw lifted, muzzle in the air. sniffing the smell of human fear. Had this been an imaginary fox? A creature of folklore, not just clever, but kind. He might as well have gone and fetched the poor girl her nightgown. But never before in his nocturnal visits to this place had the fox encountered a human being. He rotated his ears as she took a deep breath.
Next up is Jon Paley performing his impromptu speech.
Now, I'm no rocket scientist, but I can promise you it would be really hard to build the Mars rover. Now, what even sounds more baffling to me, and even trickier and more complicated with more math, is how you would fix the Mars rover when it's on Mars. And something that's really interesting is that we get some really creative ideas out of NASA for this one. Things like the Mars rover banging itself on rocks to knock some screws loose, and hopefully that fixes things. Now, what's even more astounding is that some of these ideas are actually the most helpful ones to fix these things. And it's these dumb and kind of stupid ideas that leads me to the quotation today. It is through the cracks in our brain that ecstasy steeps in, by Logan Pearsall Smith. And today I interpreted that quote to mean that it is through our shortcomings and insecurities that remarkable things happen. And I agree with this quotation for two reasons. Firstly, because even when we lie to ourselves, we can create beauty. And secondly, we can use negative emotions like fear to create something more than what we feel at the time. So first, let's talk about how even when we lie to ourselves, we can still create magical things. And to do this, I'm going to use two examples. Firstly, a theory, and then next, a musician. So first, let's look at the theory that we're going to use today, which is illusory truth theory. Now, illusory truth tells us that if we hear a lie often enough and frequent enough, eventually it might start to become true. And whether or not that lie is egregiously wrong or even a little half-truth, at a certain point, the more we hear it, the more that we believe it. Now, somebody who actually fooled themselves into thinking something was the famous musician Mozart, who towards the end of his life was extremely poor and getting sickly. And as this was happening, somebody came to his room with a commission saying that they wanted him to make a requiem, which is a piece of music for somebody to be played after they die during a funeral service. Now, Mozart wasn't in any position to pass up this money, so immediately he began working as diligently as possible. And the more he worked on this piece of music, the worse his health became. Slowly, and the more that this person frequented him, he thought that they were the angel of death, preparing him to eventually die, and that he was writing his own requiem, that when he was going to die, that they would play this music because this was what he was writing it for. In fact, he started to think this so much and so often that he thought that when he died, that this is when he was going to finally complete his piece. But actually, Mozart died before this. And even though this happened, we can see that when his piece was completed by a few of his aides, it was one of the most majestic and beautiful pieces of music ever written, showing that even though Mozart deceived himself, he was still able to create something magical and extraordinary that we still cherish to this day. Next, let's go ahead and look at how even negative emotions like fear can help us to create. And to do this, let's look at, firstly, another theory, and then an author. So first, let's look at the theory of terror management, which says that humans are afraid to die, and that we will do as much as we can to manage this terror of death, and to even manage our terror in general. Now, somebody who took advantage of this and was able to use it to make a creative outlet was the 20th century author H.P. Lovecraft, who, despite being actually kind of racist and, a little bit terrible, was able to use his sense of dread and fear to actually create a beautiful, beautiful genre within horror writing called cosmic horror. In fact, H.P. Lovecraft used his negative emotions, used his terror, and used those things which made him frightened to actually appeal to a wider audience and to pave the ground for famous horror authors such as Stephen King to come in and be able to utilize this and create beautiful things. We see from H.P. Lovecraft that even a scary emotion like fear can help us and prompt us to create beautiful things. So today, I have the quotation. It is through the cracks in our brains that ecstasy steeps in. And I interpreted this today to mean it is through our shortcomings and insecurities where beautiful things can happen. And I thought this way for two reasons. Firstly, because even when we lie to ourselves, we can create beautiful things. And secondly, even negative emotions like fear can help us to create wonderful outlets. And even going back to the Mars rover, where it might seem like a crack in the brain to say, if you bang something on a rock, it'll fix itself. But that's sometimes the best way to solve things.
Our next performance may be triggering to some as the subject matter deals with sexual predators. With this in mind, I present to you Ashley Lindsay performing her Persuasion speech.
We should kill all pedophiles. All of them. We as a society can decide to do that. But as things stand right now, we don't punish thought crimes, no matter how horrible the thought. And until we decide we can kill all pedophiles, we have to change the way we talk and the way we think about pedophiles. If you disagree with me right now, that's okay. Listen to Patty Wetterling. In 1989, Patty suffered the unimaginable when her son, Jacob, was kidnapped, raped, and murdered by a man hiding in the night. In 1993, Patty Wetterling was instrumental in passing the Jacob Wetterling Act, which required all states to keep track of sex offenders on a registry. Years later, Mrs. Wetterling has changed her stance based on the evidence. She is now an advocate against sex offender registries. She says the way we label them and monitor them doesn't work. Instead, she advocates for the treatment of both sex offenders and pedophiles. And just to be clear, most pedophiles are not sex offenders. This is uncomfortable. It's been uncomfortable for me to write, to talk about with my family, but it's important. Today, we are going to tackle the issue of pedophilia in the hopes of figuring out how to keep kids safe using an evidence-based approach. This topic requires a slightly unique approach. A cause, effect, and solution will be presented for each main point. First, we'll cover how we should treat sex offenders, then how to treat pedophilia, and finally, why we must change our attitudes. When we look at how sex offenders are treated currently, you'll notice it's missing one key element: an emphasis on what will prevent harm. We would do well to dispel some myths, which act as causes, before we even begin. First, according to the Department of Justice on May 30th, 2019, sex offenders are the second least likely of any group to reoffend, only behind homicides. Second, sex offender registries simply don't work. According to the state-funded nonpartisan group, the Council for State Governments, in June 2018, there is little empirical proof that sex offender registries and notification make communities any safer, partly because registries are overwhelmed by insignificant things like peeing outside. But also, registries come with residency restrictions for offenders. In a personal interview I conducted with Dr. Melissa Hamilton, law professor at the University of Houston and expert in sex offender recidivism, on September 28, 2020. None of this does anything to prevent harm. Dr. Hamilton went on to say that the data is clear. Children are simply under greater threat from people they know, not people they don't. Both of these myths show that sex offender registries are nearly useless. The effect is a massive waste of money. According to SORNA, which requires states to comply with sex offender registries, they cost $488 million in year one. States are spending hundreds of millions on fear instead of evidence-based prevention. The solution? practice evidence-based medicine, use the money from registries on therapy, and medication cocktails that actually prevent offenses. I know it offends our sensibilities to provide pedophiles with resources, but our sensibilities are preventing us from protecting children from the most devastating harm imaginable. We need Congress to pass common sense reform of sex offender registries. Now that we've talked about sex offenders, it's important to understand that they are separate from so-called virtuous pedophiles. Psychology Today on February 22, 2019, defines pedophilia as an ongoing sexual attraction to prepubertal children. Like any attraction, being a pedophile doesn't seem to be a choice. Associate Professor of Social Work at Barry University, Jill Levinson, who treats and studies sex offenders, found in a 2019 study that there is an ever-growing community of people who refer to themselves as virtuous pedophiles, meaning that they are committed to avoid acting on their sexual urges. According to the Journal of Interpersonal Violence from 2019, therapy has been proven to help virtuous pedophiles abstain from offending. However, because there are no guidelines on how to treat pedophiles, stigma leads many to deny treating these patients at all. This highlights the effect. According to Johns Hopkins University on August 24, 2020, clinical social workers refusing to work with non-offending pedophiles leads to them offending. By denying these people treatment, we leave them to their own devices, leave them to online forums, and the darkest part of them is never addressed by a professional. Virtuous non-offending pedophiles need to feel they can safely see a professional. In the article, Beyond the Ick Factor, from the Clinical Social Work Journal of 2019, authors compiled a comprehensive list of strategies to use when working with such clients. If you know a therapist, ask them about the article. Encourage them to read it. Now, without changing our attitudes and our rhetoric, political change is impossible. So, we have to start with us. Kill them all or they're monsters are the most common responses I've heard when I tell people my topic. Some have even gone down the QAnon conspiracy rabbit hole, where they believe a secret society of Hollywood elites is running a child sex trafficking ring, and only Trump can stop it. The effect is clear. BBC on September 11, 2020 explains how the demonization of pedophiles makes it extremely difficult for young non-offenders to seek help before offending. And if we want to kill all pedophiles, we don't want them to get treatment. There's no fixing a monster. According to the Washington Post from August 27, 2020, QAnon works to misdirect and misrepresent the very nature of child abuse. If we have people focusing on Hollywood, then they aren't focusing on the actual mass of perpetrators. All of that garbage distracts from saving children. Period. Full stop. There are simple solutions. Change how you think and how you talk. First, remember, rage scares children. If they think you're going to kill someone, they might not tell you what's happened to them. They don't want you to go to jail. Next, instead of saying kill all pedophiles, change your rhetoric to protect our children based on the evidence. We know therapy works. We know medications work. Make sure that others know this as well. Finally, I'm not trying to make you care for pedophiles or sex offenders. I'm hoping that you're open to the information that shows we can better protect our children, even if that evidence points to, quote, helping pedophiles. Today, we have taken a closer look at sex offenders, pedophiles, and ourselves in regard to the real, rational steps we can take to keep our children safe. I know that separating our emotions from this issue is easier said than done. But when that's what it takes to protect the most innocent members of our society, we have no other choice. If you can find it in your heart to look past the hysteria and simmer your rage, You'll have the children of tomorrow to thank you for it.
Finally, we have Victoria Vinson performing her prose.
You wake up and the air is milky and bright. The room glows with a kind of effervescent contentment, despite the boxes and clothes and dishes. You think to yourself, this is the kind of morning you can get used to. When you roll over, she is staring at you. The luminous innocence of the light curdles in your stomach. You don't remember ever going from awake to afraid so quickly. You were moving all night, she says. Your arms and your elbows touched me. You kept me awake. If you apologize profusely, go to page 2. If you tell her to wake you up next time your elbows touch her in your sleep, go to page 3. In 2019, there were 193 deaths across the world due to domestic violence. And sadly, as the world locked down around us, the Washington Post reports a dramatic increase in domestic violence cases. Ironic how those closest to us are capable of hurting us the most. While some may argue that staying in abusive relationships remains largely the choice of the abused, these notions fail to recognize how much of these agencies are being actually manipulated. How much of a choice do we really have if we feel there are no other choices? And even if we make all of the right choices, domestic violence is a vicious cycle that is nearly impossible to break from. So today, I invite you to play along in this choose your own adventure, as you are a part of this story just as much as I am. In the Dream House by Carmen Maria Machado. If you apologize profusely, go to page 2. If you tell her to wake you up next time your elbows touch you in your sleep, go to page 3. Page 3. Baby, well, if this ever happens again, you can always wake me up and I'll move, or I'll go to the couch. I promise. I really don't mean to do it. I can't control how much I move in my sleep. You're such a fucking cunt, she says. You never take responsibility for anything you do. I said all you have to do is wake me up and I'll move. I'll go to the couch. I promise. This kind of incoherent desperation rushing through your skull. Wake me up and I'll move. Fuck you, she says. She gets out of bed. You follow her all the way to the kitchen. Go to page 15. Breakfast. You scramble some eggs, make some toast. She eats mechanically and leaves the plate on the table. Clean that up, she says. If you do as you're told, go to page 13. If you tell her to do it herself, go to page 17. 17. Are you kidding? Really? 17. You would never do this. Don't try to convince any of these people that for 1 second you would try to stand up for yourself. Get out of here. Go to page 10. That night, she fucks you as you lie there mutely, praying for it to be over. Praying that she won't notice you're gone. You have voided your body so many times by now that it is a force of habit, reflexive as a sigh. It reminds you of that one time that your boyfriend used to fucking watch you while used to fuck you while watching porn. How he rutted and every so often he would say, "Hey, I love you." You don't think he meant it. And then you remember every time he used to pick up the remote and rewind something you couldn't see. And you remember having enough courage to stick your head over the lip of the bed and you saw all tangled of upside down limbs you couldn't make sense of. You never looked again. You would just lie there silently, watching his face move over you. It was like being unfolded beneath the yawn of the planetarium as a kid. The fast rotation of the earth, the stars moving above you, the planets going into and out of being as some distant, disembodied voice told some ancient story to try to make sense of it all. You moaned and sighed. She stopped. She turns out the lights. And you watch the darkness as the darkness leaves you. Or you leave it. To dream of the past, go to page 11. To dream of the present, go to page 12. To dream of the future, go to page 14. Page 12. You shouldn't be here. But it's okay. It's just a dream. And she can't find you here. In a minute, you're going to wake up and everything is going to seem like it's the same, but it's not, okay? There's a way out. There's a way out. Are you listening to me? You can't forget this when you wake up. You can't. There's a way out. You can't forget this when you wake up. You can't. Go to page 1. You wake up and the air is milky and bright. The room glows with a kind of effervescent contentment despite the boxes and clothes and dishes. You think to yourself, well, this is the kind of morning you could get used to. When you turn over, she is staring at you. The luminous innocence of the light curdling in your stomach. You don't remember ever going from awake to afraid so quickly. You're moving all night, she says. Your arms and your elbows touched me. You kept me awake. Seven years later, and you still dream about it. Even though I am 4 houses, 3 lovers, 2 states, and 1 wife past the dream house. And the dreams aren't quite unlike those I had when I was a child. The ones where I could hear the distant thumping of some unseen monster. And the footsteps never seemed to slow down or speed up, but remained terribly, horribly even. And when I tried to hide, because hiding was all I could do, there never seemed to be the possibility of opening the door and going into the outside world beyond the dream house. There'd be monsters in the way. A skeleton under the bed. A ventriloquist dummy behind the shower curtain. A zombie in the closet. And while they were terrible and terrifying, I had the sense in the dream that I could not share a hiding space with them. I also had the sense that they were also scared. Smaller monsters terrified of this large, unseen thing. And as I ran from room to room, the footsteps of the oncoming thing never seemed to falter. And so, 7 years later, I am still terrified that if I tried to wake myself up like I did in the dream, that she would step into the waking world. She would step out of my dream and into the waking world where I am safe. and I am so far away.
Thanks so much for coming to our showcase. We really hope you enjoyed it. We're currently raising money for our team, so if you did enjoy the performances, please consider donating at the link down below. Thanks, and be well.